Hello there, my name's Ian Anderson, one of the developers of Keyframe Toolbox, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make an icon bounce. Now I've got an icon on my timeline and I've already applied the Keyframe Toolbox effect. Now for this I'm going to be focusing mostly on position X and Y. Let's start with position X. So let's say I want the image to move onto the screen and finish moving around there. I could lock in my current position, and it does make sense a lot of the time to have the final keyframe be the first keyframe you make. Now I'm going to press the up arrow to come all the way back to the beginning, and then I want to move this off to the left. Now I could do this with the on-screen controls, using the shift key to only create a position keyframe. There actually already was a keyframe at the start there anyway, but I could have just dragged this up and down here if I wanted to. Now, I want to make this bounce, so how high do I want it to bounce from? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump to the next position keyframe, and I'm going to create a keyframe on Y as well, just to remember the current Y value. And now I'm going to jump back to the start, and I'm going to move that up. So I'm going to have it bouncing from not entirely off screen. It's a little easier to visualize this way. Now, that will just simply move from one point to the next. So how do we create a bounce between these two? Now, if I fit this graph, and I'll just give myself a little bit of extra space above and below, that will let me see what I've got in a lot more detail. And I can also make this graph bigger. I'm going to drag a box. Dragging a box selects multiple keyframes at once. I'm sitting on one keyframe, but I've got two selected. Now I can right-click, choose presets, and there's a bunch of presets I've made, but these top presets are all built in. Now my favorite is the first one, oscillate. Because I've selected keyframes, it says oscillate range. If I hadn't selected anything, it would be oscillating the graph. Now you can see what we've got. If these were at the wrong limits, I can drag the height at both sides. Now I don't want to move this off 0. I want it to bounce back to its regular position. And if I use the live/OSC switch, which I can do with caps lock, then I can see that this is moving all the way through. Now I can play this and you can see that it's moving up and down like a sine wave. Not really what I want. But this little button here changes the type, and it'll move between the sine wave or a bounce or an upside down bounce, depending on what you're looking for. And all of the presets have this flip button, so you can always flip a preset graph the other way up. Now, all these other controls are draggable, drag on the numbers. So this one is how bendy each of these points are. I normally leave that one at 50 to get a more natural looking bounce. This one is the wavelength, so how many bounces do you want? This one is the phase, so you can control where it's finishing. So if I want it to end exactly at that point, I could leave the phase there. But if I'm going to play with decay, I need to do that first. So I want this to come to a finish. I think I maybe want fewer bounces, and I could use phase to further tweak that, but I think that's probably going to look pretty good. Oh no, it's probably a little bit slow. Yeah, okay, so that's a little bit slow. I probably want the whole thing to take less time. So you can tweak all of these things as much as you like. So I'm going to make it run a little bit faster. I'm going to play with this. I'm going to come back to the beginning, and so long as I don't click away and manually change any of these keyframes, I can keep tweaking the preset options. Now, I'm actually not too unhappy with that. We've got a separate movement on X and Y, but it's kind of stopping pretty steeply at the end. And I can increase the amount of decay to stop that from happening, and it'll get lower quicker. Now, if you have something else in mind, if you want to change how these points move, you can, of course, just zoom right in, and you might choose to just manually adjust these. And you'll see when I manually moved some of these keyframes, my preset options have disappeared. So if you really want these, and I'll have to just play that a couple of times. There we go, that's better. So that's okay. I think that's a little bit more of a gentle stop, but the horizontal movement is not gentle enough. So I'm going to hold Command or Option and Shift and just give myself a really nice slow finish on X. So it's going to bounce and it's going to slowly slow down. There we go. And I think that worked out as a really quite nice, natural, still on the slow side, but, you know, depends on the context. Maybe that's fine. And it's certainly landing as a nice central spot. And honestly, I think that looks great. Now you may notice I've got motion blur active. So if I stop halfway through while it's moving quite quickly there, then you can look in the settings and motion blur is active. I could increase the amount of blur by making the shutter last longer. And I like sample counts as 24 just to make it look more natural. Terrific. Now, if I want that to fade in, I could just add a couple of keyframes here. If I want it to fade out at the end or do something fancier, I absolutely can. Maybe I'll have it blur out at the end. So I'm going to lock that in to remember where it's just before it starts to fade or blur out. Let's crank up the blur. Let's smooth that off. And now at the end, it can blur out. Now, anytime you're doing something like a blur, I can double click on that keyframe. It will jump straight to that point, moves the playhead there. So I can just match that time, fade it out at the end. Nice soft fade. And now blur and a fade out. Oh, lots more in the timeline there. Let's zoom back. Now, the presets are super powerful. You can do an awful lot with them. That's just one of the presets. If you want to explore what the other presets do, min-max, min-max-min, min-max hold-min, and min-max hold-max, then you can either check out the tutorials we've got online or wait for future videos here where I'll hopefully go through some more of those. Thanks so much for watching and hope you enjoy. Bye-bye.